What really matters, the heart, the spirit. That's what we're all about here at Webdelics.
I wanted to be a brain surgeon. She goes, why a brain surgeon? I told her I want to change how people think.
You're talking about seeing these children and hearing the cries yourself.
We needed to have good people everywhere having these conversations so that we could figure out how to fix this problem for good. I have to remember that everybody was a child once.
What that psilocybin journey was like and exactly how it changed you.
There were things that I was doing that was out of integrity, and it was going to require some major healing to fix that.
The language that you just used was inspirational and epic. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Webdelics podcast, where we're on a journey to find out the truth about plant medicine and psychedelics, get rid of the myths, and change the narrative. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and with us today is a very special guest. I've been so excited to talk to him. I can barely contain myself. His name is Paul Hutchinson. And Paul, you're sitting before me right now. Tell us all about yourself.
Thank you, Scott. Well, I've had a lot of beautiful blessings in my life. I'm the founder of what is now a multi-billion-dollar investment fund. I have 3 boys and now 2 girls from later in life. Life is wonderful. People would know me from a movie that came out last summer called The Sound of Freedom. I not only am the primary investor in Sound of Freedom, but I'm the executive producer and was actually on that rescue mission in Colombia that ended up with freeing over 120 victims. My character in the movie was Pablo Delgado, the rich guy who was played by Eduardo Verástegui, the producer of the movie. And the fund manager who decides to quit his job to go undercover and help rescue children. From accolade standpoint, I have everything from multiple honorary doctorate degrees to the Ellis Island Medal of Honor, and just last year the Medal of Freedom Award, International Medal of Freedom. And I only have one thing on my business card: Paul Hutchinson, DMA. People, doctor of medical, whatever. Nope, DMA doesn't mean anything, because all that other crap really doesn't mean anything. It's accolades, it's awards, but the man that you look at in the mirror every day and the heart behind that man or woman in the mirror, that means everything. And so that's a quick introduction of me. One thing that we may want to go into a little bit is that after that Colombia rescue mission that was depicted on Sound of Freedom, I have led or played a key part in over 70 undercover rescue missions in 15 countries, and have been in the pit of hell. I've seen the darkest depravity that human nature has to offer. And on the flip side, I have seen some of the most beautiful transformations you can imagine through the use of psychedelics, and have hosted or facilitated over 50 guided meditation, plant medicine journey experiences. And we're here now in Latin America looking at expanding some more. So I'm very aligned with this audience in fighting evil on all fronts and understanding the power of Mother Earth and the healing power of some of these tools.
There was so much said within that introduction that we could probably have entire podcast episodes about every single sentence. Suffice it to say that that sense of holistic understanding of yourself, what really matters, the heart, the spirit, that's what we're all about here at Webdelics. And that you would bring that to the fore is why I say with my own heart and my own spirit, Paul, welcome to the show. Now, the theme of today is ending cycles of abuse and how the journey away from those cycles can open the door to light. As you were talking about some of the horrors you've seen and some of the beauties that you almost described in a way that's transcendent, I can't help but think about the polarity of life, the ups and downs and the extremes within which we all operate. But anyone who looks at your bio, which they're going to find in the show notes or will be discussed later in more detail on this show, may be surprised to find out, considering where you started in life, that these vicissitudes would be something that you live out in the way that you have. So every audience member is going to be asking themselves, what happened? Talk us through right from the beginning, Paul.
I'll touch on a couple things. When I was super young, I remember a time where I was getting very, very, very bullied, and I won't go through the details. It was difficult, but I remember coming home and crying, and I told my mom, I said, I've decided what I want to be when I grow up. And it wasn't a police officer or a jail person or somebody who could beat them all up. What I decided is I wanted to be a brain surgeon. She goes, why a brain surgeon? And I told her I want to change how people think, referring to some of the bullying that was going on. And I was serious. I started studying that, and fairly soon after, I decided I was like 8 years old. And I changed my focus to being a heart surgeon instead. I think intuitively I realized that if I wanted to change how people thought, I needed to start with their heart. And I finished a whole year worth of college while I was still in high school. In terms of credits, I was 2 months away from taking the MCAT to allow me into. I'd done all my pre-med stuff, and I got in a major car accident, and I severed the tendons in my hand. And they didn't know if I'd have the dexterity to be a surgeon, so I changed my major to business and finance. And there's a lot of stories behind that. I worked, in the children's hospital for a while and putting myself through school, etc. But fast forward, I was living 10 years ago. I wasn't Paul Hutchinson. I was Paul effin Hutchinson. I had created my own trauma in the life that I was living. I had a basketball court in my basement, right? I have every member of the NBA is at my house with half the city of beautiful women that were there. And this was I wasn't doing anything illegal, but it was from an energetic standpoint. I had built a multi-billion-dollar company, and I was living in this state of opulence. Now, how I had built that company has a lot to do with the charity work. I made a decision in my early 20s with a mentor that I would give a large percentage of my money and time to charity. And I served on all kinds of different boards. We helped build different things for the kids. I was on the Make-A-Wish board of directors. I was on the board of directors for the Living Planet Aquarium that built that with $60 million. All these beautiful things. But it was at that height of money and things and company and whatever that I got a call from the Attorney General. And he knew more about my background than most people, knew that I had a certain set of skills from a previous life that would make me somewhat safe in a dangerous place. And he called and he told me about a Homeland Security agent who was in Colombia who had identified some children that needed to be rescued. And we can go into details about that, but that phone call changed everything in terms of my trajectory, where I was going in life, what was important to me, and everything changed when I started to realize the atrocities that were really in this world and how many children were being abused and how many children were being sold for something this horrible.
You know, listening to everything that you just said, it's interesting. Sometimes life events that seem random, when we look back and construct our narrative around them and we look at everything that led to those events, like a random call from the Department of Homeland Security, I would imagine, at least felt like in the moment, really our entire lives had set us up to do. I personally have to say I appreciate your history of contributing to charities. I worked in the nonprofit sector for a long time in the domestic abuse space. And abuse of children and of others has been an ongoing theme on this show since the very first episode, Paul. And here it is, coming up again. Abuse, psychedelics, the ability to transform from trauma, it seems to be foundational to what the meaning of the psychedelic renaissance is all about. We're going to get to all of that in a few minutes because I have no doubt you have a lot to say about it, but you left us hanging. What happened next? I have to know.
Well, what happened next is fairly similar to what you'll see in the Sound of Freedom movie. With I'm not going to get all of the details of what was different in the movie, but I was on the next plane to Cartagena, Colombia. I had been introduced to this Homeland Security agent who then asked me to not only help fund this rescue mission, but when he called me, he said, "Paul, I think that there's more than 100 children in this area." And he said, "I think we can rescue them all on the same day, but I need your help." And I said, "Well, how much do you need?" Thinking he needed a bigger check. And he said, "I need you. Can you be in Colombia in 2 days?" And I was in. I was every charity that I've done, I made a decision not just to write a check, but to get involved in some way. And I asked him, "Why do you need me?" And he said, "Well, the head trafficker down here has a piece of property he wants to develop into a child brothel sex resort, like a Jeffrey Epstein Island." He said he needs a few $1 million to make it happen. And he believes he can make tens of millions of dollars a year selling children to rich Americans for sex. And so 2 days later, I'm face to face with the most evil people you can imagine, negotiate this deal. This trafficker leans forward halfway through the meeting and he goes, "Pablo, I have a gift for you." I said, "Really, what's your gift?" And he shows me his phone, and there's a picture of an 11-year-old girl on his phone. He said, "This is Princess. She's still a virgin. We just took delivery of some." And in the movie Sound of Freedom, I at first pushed back. My character pushed, I don't want to be involved. But then when my driver gives me this picture of this 11-year-old girl that the Homeland Security agent gave him, that's what changed my mind. In real life, I was already there. I was face to face with these traffickers, and it ended up being the largest child rescue mission in one day in history that I know of. At the time, 127 children. And the most beautiful moment for me, and I'm skipping hours and hours of detail here, but the most beautiful moment for me was after the agents came, stormed the party, arrested everybody. 30 child protective service people came in with the children, and they started laughing. They started singing with these children. And that, compared to the crying that I heard less than an hour before, that singing was that sound of freedom was the most beautiful sound that I ever heard. That's why we named the movie that. And I told the agent, I said, "That changed my whole life. I want to help. What can I do? Can I write you a big check?" And he said, "Unfortunately, there's a large demand for something like these parties from wealthy business owners who look and dress and talk like you." He said, he talked about the Jeffrey Epstein Island type things. And he said, "If you're willing to be the bait, I'll change your whole life." So since that time, I've led or played a key role in over 70 undercover rescue missions. But the transition and where we're going to transition this into psychedelics is where it's super important. After 10 years of doing this work, I realized that every single time we go in and pull a child out of hell, we're making a difference in the life of that child. But if not enough is being done to fix the demand, then 10, 20, 30 more children are brought back in to fit the demand. There's more children being sold today than there were 10 years ago. Now, so I took a step back and I said, are we just fighting fire with fire? Throwing guys in jail and rescuing kids and throwing guys in jail and rescuing kids. Is fighting fire with fire just creating more fire? And so I said, I need to understand where this is all coming from. And realize this, Scott, somebody doesn't just grow up and 40 years old decide, I'm bored, I'm going to go rape a child in Colombia. It doesn't start there. What happens is this. Almost one out of every 2 women listening to us right now have been a victim of sexual violence at some time in their life. 1 out of 4, it was as they were a child. 1 in 4 women were sexually abused as children. With men, it's a little bit less. It's 1 in 5 at some time in our lives. But even those, 25%, it was under the age of 10 years old, most of them in their own homes. So here's what's happening. Yes, 10 million children being sold is a scary, huge number. But well over 1.5 billion people were abused as children. This is a massive number. And what's happening is this. 2/3 of men who go through that, 2/3, God bless them, God bless us. We decide that we're going to become protectors at all costs. That pain is something that we're going to ensure is never passed on, ever. However, 1 out of every 3, if not given the healing, the love that they need to heal, 1 out of every 3 who were abused as children become contact offenders in passing on that trauma in the form of physical or verbal or even the sexual abuse of children. See, here's the thing, Scott. People ask me, they say, Paul, how can you go face to face so many times with somebody selling you a child and not have them see the anger and the hatred in your eyes? And my answer surprises them. And it makes some people mad. Here's what it is. I don't hate them. Now, don't get me wrong. I put my life in danger to ensure they never hurt innocents again, to ensure they're behind bars. But what I wish is that I could go back 5 or 10 years before they ever hurt a child and figured out what was going on in their life, what kind of pain they were holding on to. Chances are they were raped as children themselves. Very, very high chance. Most of them were. And the ones that say they weren't were. I'll just tell you that. And most of them had a million bad things that happened to them. That still doesn't justify their actions. But what it does do is it helps us look from a compassionate standpoint at humanity. What we don't have is a time machine. And those guys that have crossed that line, that have raped a child, they're wasting my oxygen, right? However, what we do have is billions of suffering people who are in a world where the tools to alleviate that suffering were made illegal in the late 60s. Are you kidding me? About 7.5, 8 years ago, I had one of my undercover operators call me. He said, Paul, do you trust me? I said, yeah, I trust you with my life when we're in these dangerous places. He said, you need to join me in a ceremony. I'm like, what do you mean, a ceremony? He said, you have some issues you need to work through. I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm Paul Hutchinson. He goes, yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. You're on your second marriage, has fallen for a divorce. You don't have healthy relationships with your children. These are all things that are you dealing with some pretty big issues. And so I went and experienced my first Psilocybin experience about 8 years ago. And that was the single most transformational night of my life. Now, I had been doing undercover for 2 or 3 years, and I had seen the darkness. And I was, Paul Hutchinson, I'm going to come in and pay for this and help rescue these kids. But it was still feeding my ego. And so many people would come up to us as adults saying, hey, I was raped because we were rescuing these kids. I was raped as a child, and they've been 10 and 20 years of therapy without any significant changes. And so when I had my first experience with psychedelics, with a guided meditation, facilitated plant medicine experience, not some, let's go out and trip, but understanding the sacred nature of these tools, I had so many breakthroughs myself. And then we brought in some of these adults that had been dealing with child sexual trauma issues. And the transformations were so beautiful that I went back into the Attorney General and I said, bro, I want to bring these to Utah someday. You can either arrest me or tell me how to make them legal. And he goes, well, let's talk about that path of, helping to change the laws, etc. So I believe that very soon America will have the unrestricted access to some of these tools in a way where they won't worry about, is it decriminalized here or whatever. So that's a quick background on the journey that we can go deeper on any of them and talk about how these tools help people really, truly heal their trauma.
And we are going to go deeper. Thank you for that. Let's step back a few steps. For those who are watching this episode on YouTube, you probably will notice that as Paul, you were discussing the time when that person showed you the photo of the girl. Those who are watching will see I had a reaction. It can't really be conveyed audio-wise, but it was something I couldn't control. Having worked in the domestic violence space, it was hard for me to understand until I was in the space the levels of depravity or the levels of abuse that people are willing to inflict on those that they view as vulnerable. And by the way, when people talk about domestic violence, they usually think of battered, quote unquote, battered women. But in any given domestic violence shelter, at least half of the residents are kids who have either endured or witnessed this themselves. It can be very easy when you're hearing about these things and you don't have to face it to psychologically distance oneself from the pain and say, well, these are just people somewhere, faces. But you're talking about seeing these children and hearing the cries yourself. I would imagine, as is the case with people who work in social services, that over time, this had to traumatize you. Was that true? And did that play out in terms of where your own psychedelic journey or journeys went down the road? And perhaps also, if we could get a sense as to what you were seeing there, a picture that can be painted in the minds of those who are listening or watching.
I'll tell two stories to paint a picture so you can feel the transformation that I felt. On the day of the party in Colombia, the traffickers brought 54 children to the Cartagena location. And we put the children in this little palapa, this little building that was aside from where we were negotiating. We don't want them seeing the guns and the money changing hands. They're already traumatized enough. And halfway through the meeting, one of the traffickers stands up and he said, Pablo, talking to me, he said, I have to show you the gifts that I brought you. And he went in the house. He was in there for about 10 minutes. And that's when we could hear the children crying when he was in there with them. So badly I wanted to break cover and just go in and see what's going on with the kids. Of course, we couldn't do that. And he brought out, 10 minutes later, he brought out 4 children. All 4 of them were virgins. There was 3 little girls and 1 little boy. This little boy was a little black boy. I think they brought him in from Haiti. He was 11. They gave him cocaine that morning because he was so scared it was going to hurt. Well, effed up monster thinks that that's attractive? And these girls were shaking, and he brings this one child in front of me, the same one he showed me on that picture when I was at the restaurant with him. And Scott, I'm sitting down. She's standing up. She's not much taller than I am. As I'm sitting down, we're almost eye level. And all I could see in her eyes was fear. I asked her name. She didn't answer. I'm sure that's because her real name wasn't Princess. And I told the traffickers, not time for the party, have them go inside. I told this little girl this to be in. But it was at that moment that I made a promise to myself, to God, to that child, that I would dedicate my life to eradicating that evil from the face of the earth. I couldn't imagine anything worse than if I had a child, if I had an 11-year-old little girl, anything worse than somebody selling her for sex. It just was so heavy. And now with the foundation that I was helping to start at the time, the money I've donated there, and other money we've helped to bring in, and other foundations that we have helped to fund and begin, we've calculated over 6,000 trafficked victims are now free and back with their families again. But even more than that, when you consider the movie and the number of lives that it changed, we realized we were never going to fix this problem by just doing a bunch of undercover work. We had to create a movement. We needed to have good people everywhere having these conversations so that we could figure out how to fix this problem for good.
For those who are listening or watching, I hope it goes without saying that you do need to see this movie, and I suspect many of those who are listening or watching have seen it. The one thing that I do ask anyone who's listening or watching is to not shy away from the feelings that you might be having as you're hearing what you have to say, Paul, because that's really the only way this sort of stuff is going to stick with us and keep us motivated to be on your side and support what you're doing. How were you psychologically able to get to the place where, data notwithstanding, you were able to yourself, on the topic of feeling, feel the compassion for those that were perpetrating these monstrosities? Data, that's one thing. It speaks in a way. But to me, it would be so hard to get myself to care. How did you get yourself emotionally there, Paul?
My caring for the children transcends everything. And but as I care for those children, I have to remember that everybody was a child once. And my compassion for these children that were being trafficked and so badly wanting to free that, if I just expressed anger and hatred, then it wasn't the energy of healing. And so if I can heal the children, and if I can prevent others from being abused, then we never have to go through that healing process. And as I delved more deeply into the stories of the perpetrators and came to an understanding that most of them were trafficked as children or raped as children or whatever else, it still didn't take away from my passion for ensuring they don't hurt innocents again. But it opened up my eyes to understanding that the true solution was all about healing. It was about healing the young adults, even the teenagers, anybody who's holding on to things that don't belong to them. Especially men. Guys, this guy will, that thing that happened to me with my uncle, when I was 8 years old, if I talk about that, then it's going to make me, less of a man. No, it won't. You were 8. That was a horrible thing that happened to that little 8-year-old boy because somebody else was in pain. And if we can love him and heal him and help each adult realize, my goal is not to go rescue the 10-year-old from the clutches of a trafficker in Honduras. My goal is to help each one of you go on your own child rescue mission to rescue that 10-year-old, that 8-year-old, that 6-year-old inside of yourself. And that's what these tools allow us to do. And these conversations, as we're saying, okay, how do we really, really fix this problem?
I'm so glad you had that special part of your message to men. I know that when it came to addressing the abuse I suffered, I, for years, would lie and even lie to myself about the extent of it and the emotional impact for the exact reason that you're talking about. I wanted to seem tough. I didn't want people to see that weakness. It makes me think of jingoism and the public expressions that we feel we're allowed to say irrespective of their connection to truth. Jingoism goes as to that sort of public statement about our abuse. Jingoism goes as to what feelings we feel we can express about the perpetrators of these horrific violences against people. You yourself seem to acknowledge that it can be controversial to say anything other than they're evil or they're horrible or worthy of condemnation. And then jingoism goes as to how we view psychedelics as a healing tool and why they're not accessible to everyone. You're consistently showing a drive to go beneath the surface, and you took that on, I assume, when you went on your psilocybin journey. Talk to us a little bit more in that depth that you're so good at about what that psilocybin journey was like and exactly how it changed you.
Well, there were two of the first 5 journeys that I did that were the most impactful. The first one, I was talking with one of my operators while on the medicine, and he said to me, he said, I left my religion of my youth about 5 years ago, and now when we're out rescuing these kids, he said, I have so much hate, so much, I just don't know that there's a God. I don't think God exists. And in that state, we were able to change his perception of what he was taught, a hateful, vengeful God who jealous God, whatever, and help him see himself in a different light. Now, my second one was what was mostly transformative for me. I got to a state in that journey where I could feel empathy like unimaginable, like physically in the body of my children. And I felt their pain when I cheated on their mom. And I could feel the pain of every person in my life that was feeling pain because of my actions. And Scott, it was so hard. And it was so deep and it was so painful. And it felt like I couldn't even breathe. I was in the depths of hell. And fortunately, I had my own playlist that I was going through in the space, and I was on one of the meditative journey songs, whatever, some deep in there, and that's what took me down. And I switched my playlist to what I call my Jesus list. It's songs of just healing and redemption and removing yourself from that old version. And I felt myself just being pulled out of the depths of hell and everything cleansing off of me. And then I said to myself, I said, Paul, have you learned your lesson yet? So I turned my playlist back to the, heavy whatever, and it took me down. But I went through this emotional experience of empathy and feeling how my actions were affecting others. Because understand this, Scott, when I went on my first undercover rescue mission, I thought that traffickers, child traffickers that I was going to see would have, multiple earrings in their noses and tattoos down their faces. And the first trafficker I met was a businessman, clean cut, polo shirt, nice car. The second one I met was a beautiful woman, classy, ran a modeling agency. They were selling children. And the common thread I realized over the last 10 years of doing undercover, the common thread between all of those traffickers was arrogance, greed, and lust. And I had to come to a point where I had to go home and look in the mirror and say, okay, Paul, you're not doing anything illegal. There's no attraction to kids. But how is greed, arrogance, and lust playing out in your life? And how is it destroying other people's lives, just like those traffickers are using it to destroy lives? And that's when I had to have that dark night of the soul and come to this realization that, yes, indeed, there were things that I was doing that was out of integrity. And it was going to require some major healing to fix that.
Wow. Maybe I'll start by just bonding with you. My own first psilocybin journey, there was a moment in which I went into a black hole. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel all of that pain. One of the things that experience gave me that I didn't even realize until this moment with you was that enhanced ability to empathize, to feel the pain and to not run from it as I'm hearing you talk. Before my own psilocybin experience, I don't know that I could have felt everything that you did or that you just shared, but I can now. And that is transformative, because thinking about what you're saying, these are folks, the traffickers, these are people who on one level or another have had all of those things shut off, perhaps due to their own damage and who knows what else has gone on. And it's ultimately going to destroy them. They're not going to end up happier or better or more fulfilled people that way. You then are committed to making change at this ground level before it starts. How did people react when you started saying, this is something I'm committed to? Did they recoil? Were they like, he's crazy? Or were they automatically just opening their arms and wanting to give you hugs and kisses? Talk to me a little bit about social reactions to this and what people said.
Well, for 10 years undercover, I had no social media. There was the social media that I had was very, very limited, and because I had different profiles for Paul Stone, Paul Steele, Paul Black, all my other undercover stuff, and so I did start a foundation called the Child Liberation Foundation, or CLF. You can go to Liberate a Child, actually Liberate Children, just liberatekchildren.org. I started that about 7-8 years ago, but mostly that was just my money going in, and I was just funding rescue missions of the kids and keeping a very low profile. And a little over a year ago, one of my guides said, "You really need to go public." My family was really pushing that as well. This is even before the movie came out, and I pushed hard. I said, I don't want it ever to be about this. I don't want you to say, oh, go to paulhutchinson.com. Look, I rescue kids, and me, because that's why I left the Homeland Security agent in the first place. Was there was some very different vibes from an energetic standpoint and what we were both committed to. And so I didn't want that. Finally, when I was convinced, I said, okay, this isn't about bringing eyeballs here. This is about liberating humanity. That's the only reason why I will go public, is if I can not just liberate the children, but liberate every child inside of every adult who is still struggling with that kind of trauma that they're holding on to. That's liberating humanity, not just liberating children. And so that's going to be our focus. And I went public about a year ago. And in the first less than a year, almost 500 million, 500 million total eyeballs on all of the videos, the shorts, the longs, everybody's profile, everybody's podcast that I've been on. My guys have counted all of the eyeballs everywhere. And it's very special to know that there are a lot of people who are resonating with this mission of using our time and our money to not only eradicate child trafficking, but helping humanity as a whole. And so that's my focus now. And a lot of people thought I was crazy, but our social media has grown, and I mean, we're still small on little things like Facebook and whatever that we're not building, but we're working on platforms now that are not going to censor us, because I've been censored a number of times on Instagram and TikTok and others. And in fact, I even got censored complete. They shut down the entire room on Clubhouse last week.
Really?
As we were, yep. The entire room I got censored, and then they shut down. There was 1,000+ people. It was a big room. So super interesting. The media trying to silence our truths.
And we can have an entire, probably series of podcast episodes about that. And as tempting as it is to go down that rabbit hole, heaven help me. I do have to ask you one last question. You know, speaking of being censored and people not understanding, that's the curse of the visionary. Nonetheless, that's who and what you are. When your vision becomes a reality, give us a peek into what this transformed world will look like, Paul.
You know, most religions, not just Christian religions, most religions believe that there's going to be a time of turmoil and then a 1,000 years of peace, you know, where there's no contention, there's no evil and whatever. Well, here's the thing, guys. God, whether that's Jesus, Jehovah, Elohim, there's all different. Everybody has a different version. God's not going to come in and just flip his fingers and say, okay, everybody's nice to each other. Now that I'm here, 1,000 years of peace, no bickering, no whatever else. That change comes from within. I believe that all those religions are right. I believe we are on the cusp of breaking this chains of tens of thousands of years of bondage and deceit. I believe we're so close to a new earth, to a new consciousness, to a breakthrough that none of us have ever imagined. I believe that transition is here, that billions of people are searching for the truth. They're frustrated at the fact that we're still hating each other and fighting each other. Realize this division in the Middle East, with all of these Jewish people hating all of these Muslim people and vice versa. This goes back to divisions that you find even in the Old Testament of the Bible that live on today. My vision of the future is when every single human being can look at every single human being with infinite love, infinite compassion, zero judgment, and understanding that we are all one, regardless of our religion, regardless of our race, regardless of our skin color, regardless of our gender. When we see each other for the divinity that we are and help each other heal, and understanding that the past does not define our present or our future. where in reality, we can heal our past by healing in the present. We can literally heal both directions. Our passing on that chain of trauma to your kids and grandkids won't happen when you break the chain yourself. And you can heal ancestral trauma at the same time. So I believe that by each of us focusing on that healing within and then going and helping others heal, the reality is if you just help 2 people heal next year and they each help 2 people heal, 33 years from now, 8.5 billion people are healed. That's my vision of the future. And it may not be all 8.5 billion, but those who choose a higher consciousness, those who choose to release the trauma of their past, those who choose to come into this new vibration will experience a new earth that has been prophesied for tens of thousands of years.
The language that you just used was inspirational and epic. I can't help but think on the subject of ancient beliefs about stories of the sun god that would go through the underworld at night and then in the day arise. And the Greeks and the Romans would say that the god of the sun was the guardian of truth because lies can't survive daylight. What you've shown us is a vision of the world where the sun god is at its summit and we can see that truth. There was so much within what you shared, Paul, that pulling out a single takeaway is next to impossible. But I'm going to try. One thing that landed with me, and I really want to mull over, process, absorb, and integrate more deeply into my own worldview, is what you said about arrogance, lust, and greed. How much of my own behavior is driven by that? How often can I wake up and look in the mirror and honestly say they're not there? If I'm able to do that tomorrow, the day after, I'll have begun a different level of change. And I thank you for that takeaway. If there's any additional thing that you would like to share, or one takeaway from everything that we've said that you'd like to just hammer home, Paul, what would it be?
I'll just take 30 seconds here and say this. When people leave the movie Sound of Freedom, they're like, oh yeah, I want to do something. Can I, how can I help? Well, the worst thing you can do is go to Colombia and try to rescue kids. You're going to get shot. You'll probably get arrested. The best thing you can do is go home and hug your children. People say, how does that fix trafficking? Well, it's everything. The majority of these children come from broken homes, runaways, a broken foster care program. And you'd be amazed at how many children are also being trafficked who sleep in their own beds at night. You need a relationship with your children where they can very comfortably come to you and say, Dad, I don't like it when you make me hug Uncle Harry because he touches me weird, or I don't like going to this friend's house because her brother grabs me in my bum, or our babysitter is showing us pornography and says we should trust her more than you, or these guys held me down at recess at school and this is what happened. You need a relationship with your children where you can have those healthy conversations and they can feel very comfortable coming to you and talking to you about these things. You do that, and you'll help rescue the most important children in your life by them not being a victim in the first place.
Thank you for that. Paul, where can people go to find out more about you? We know about your movie, but talk to us about anywhere else that we can learn more and get involved with what you're doing and support you.
Absolutely. Go to Liberating Humanity. You can type Liberating-Humanity or just liberatinghumanity.com. Either one will get you there. You can get a lot of resources to help keep your family safe. Some of my trainers that trained me before I went undercover were putting their programs and whatnot up there. We have other people that train on breath work and meditation, etc. So go to Liberating Humanity. You can follow me on all the social medias. Just type in liberating.humanity. Except for Twitter, that's just me, Paul Hutchinson. I actually just barely opened that up last week, and so I'm going to build a Twitter following as well. Or if you want to directly donate to the foundation, you can go to Child Liberation. Oh my hell, I forgot my own. No, it's the Child Liberation Foundation, but it's liberatechildren.org. That's what it is. Oh, sorry. Liberating Children. So, and if you have large stages, or whether it's a virtual stage or in person, whatnot, then have people reach out to me, and I would love to reach out to me or my team. You can find me at Paul at liberateachild.org, and love to spread this message of light and love and truth to the world. We also have some healing retreats that we facilitate here in Latin America that people can sign up for and come and spend time with us.
I read about them, and they look nothing short of extraordinary. This has been an episode unlike any other. Paul, thank you for joining us. For those of you who are listening or watching, we have a whole roster of upcoming episodes that will share stories as profound as Paul's and scientific evidence to back up everything that he's saying. If you have enjoyed this episode, and I simply cannot imagine that you haven't, please follow Webdelics on all of the audio platforms or on YouTube, and leave us a 5-star review or remarks on YouTube if that's where you're watching. Also, we'd love it if you shared the word about this episode and the life or death message that Paul has to share with everyone that you know in your life. Please make sure you do so. Then ask your friends and everyone else in your world to subscribe to the Webdelics podcast, as well as to our own social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and again, YouTube. Once you've done that, be sure to check out our website at webdelics.com. That's WEBDELICS.com for trusted, accurate, and scientifically based information about psychedelics and plant medicine. Then, above all else, be sure to come back next time for another episode of the Webdelics podcast.